Welcome to the On the Rise podcast, where we talk about time freedom, passive investing through real estate, finance, and mindset. Let's dive in. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. I am not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer. All right, welcome back on the Rise podcast, listeners. Thank you again for jumping into yet another episode of the On the Rise podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Dyer, and guys, I have an amazing guest, probably the most amazing guest I've ever had to date on this podcast. I know I'm kind of puffing him up here a little bit here, but I have the one and the only, my son, Jack Dyer. Jack, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here, Dad.
Looking forward to chopping it up with you today, JD. So Jack is a young entrepreneur who has been selling and building businesses from a very early age. He originally launched an outdoor services company and learned firsthand what it takes to operate a business as an entrepreneur in the real world. Most of those that have listened to this podcast in the past know that I brought you up a couple of different times, mostly because a lot of busy professionals wait until their 30s and 40s before they decide to scratch the entrepreneurial itch. Jack decided to scratch that itch much earlier than I think most. So JD, would love for you to let us know a little bit maybe more about kind of your background, your journey, what you're focused on today, etc.
Yeah, for sure. I've always kind of had this thing for selling. I remember my first big sales project was in third grade. They had a little competition for us. Whoever could sell the most would get a different level of prize, and the top prize that they never expected anyone to get was, I don't remember what the number was, but the prize was a phone, and I wanted a phone. And ended up selling those like newspapers and wrapping papers and whatnot for about a couple weeks. And I ended up hitting that goal just from, calling family members. I learned how to cold call, went around and door knocked my neighborhood and the neighborhoods around us. And, from that point forward, that was kind of my thing. I just really liked doing that. And it even goes further back. I remember when I was very little, I clipped flowers out of our garden, and I walked over and I sold them to the next door neighbor. We found some like junk car parts in the woods, and I knew one of our neighbors was a mechanic, so I put them in a wagon and I walked over there and I sold them to that neighbor. And I'm sure I wasn't that good at it. I'm sure they were kind of just like, oh yeah, this is just a young kid. He just wants to sell me something. I'm sure it was just cute to them, but it was always fun for me. I feel like I typically am better at things that are fun to me, that I actually enjoy. So that was a good starting point. And then on the business ownership side, I remember I got my first job. I applied the day I turned 14, which was the legal minimum in Minnesota at the time. And I went and worked my first shift there, and I came back and I told you, Dad, I don't want to work for the man anymore. and and you're like, well, sometimes you got to suck it up. And I did. I worked there for about a year, and then I took that summer, worked at a summer camp, and then I went. And the next year, I worked for a couple of landscaping companies, and then and I realized, I was like, hey, I'm pretty good at this, and I know how to sell. I feel like I could do pretty good doing this by myself. And then that's kind of where my first company, Dyer Brothers, started.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and I appreciate you kind of sharing that. Like father, like son is kind of one thing that comes to mind immediately here. But I know that you have, you've started and you've shut down multiple different businesses. Anything from your drop shipping company to your Stir Sticks coffee, roasting business that we kind of started, and and kind of culminated as a family. But you've also started other companies like Dyer Brothers Outdoor Services and Superior, Lawn, and now LandClear, right? My question for you is what failures did you kind of learn early on in some of those initial businesses that maybe other people don't really think about those types of things, until much later in life?
Sure, sure. I guess I can walk through them in order. I kind of forgot about the drop shipping thing. Um, so in 10th grade, I started taking PSEO classes, which is Minnesota's offering for high school students to take college classes and receive both college and high school credit. And you're allowed to start that in 10th grade with a limited amount of classes. And I had always been interested in business, so I took an intro to business class. Um, and the requirement for that class, the final project that you work on throughout the entire years, you have to have two things. You have to have a business plan, and you have to have a working online commerce site. You don't have to sell anything through it, you just have to have it. And I was really bored because I wasn't doing anything else. So I took a weekend and then part of the next week, and I built out the website and I built out the business plan, and I had every requirement done for that class before the first lecture. Um, and I ended up just using that extra time throughout that semester because we had a free subscription to the website service. I think we were using Wix. Um, and I just took that time to grow it and upgrade it. And I ended up making about $2,000 just off of drop shipping cheap plastic stuff from China through AliExpress. Um, and I guess just like a brief overview of how that works. It's an automatic plugin where somebody orders something that I have posted on my website, and then my website automatically orders it from another website, and then it sends it to them. It's kind of like a middleman thing. But these Chinese companies aren't allowed to heavily advertise in the US, so they're okay with it, and then I take a cut. Um, so yeah, that was good. The thing that really ended up shutting that one down was I just kind of got bored of it. Um, it wasn't making nearly enough money for the amount of time I was putting into it. I think in about 4 months, I think I made $2,000, and a lot of it was just family and friends. And then it also, I wasn't able to sell to anyone twice because I was selling all outdoor gear like tents and camping supplies, knives. But, again, it was all just a bunch of cheap stuff that I was marking up. Um, I wasn't ever really to get, I wasn't really able to get many repeat customers because there was no subscription service involved. Um, and that's kind of, what put me on towards the landscaping business. Um, the coffee business, that was probably, I think that was one of the first ones that we did. It was really your passion project, and you were able to kind of, take us along underneath you and teach us, how to run and operate a business. I remember, you sitting down with us being like, guys, I just bought a coffee roaster, and we were all like, cool. Myself, I don't drink coffee. I like energy drinks. Um, but it smells good. um, but it was good to learn that a lot of door knocking. I've door knocked for every business I've ever been a part of, and that's really good because I've never been super comfortable with it. But it's always good to kind of get out of that comfort zone and just start talking to people. It's always really helpful, in the sales world anyway. Um, but yeah, that was always good. It was good to learn how to not only sell, but also how to operate stuff on the back end. I remember going through spreadsheets with mom because we did a lot of that back end stuff. And then the production line, um, taking the coffee from the roaster because you were the roast master, and then weighing it out, putting it in the bags, sealing them up, putting the labels on them, and then, either shipping them out or hand delivering them if we had local customers. Um, that was good. I think we ended up shutting that one down just because I think it just wasn't really scalable. You have to have a commercial kitchen license or something like that to be able to actually ship a food product. and we weren't able to scale it past our little local area, and it was pretty expensive to run, I remember.
Yeah, you definitely learned a lot of lessons in that for sure. And I want to go back to kind of that drop shipping thing and make just a comment there. If you are listening to this podcast episode and you have a son or daughter, maybe in junior high, high school, college, starting a drop shipping company as an e-commerce platform is definitely a great way to get started at a very fairly low cost investment. And then as Jack mentioned, we kind of pivoted over to this coffee roasting company. And of course, the idea there was to provide exposure to my children as it relates to things like door knocking and sales and customer service, production, those sorts of things. And really, that business, as Jack mentioned before, it just got to the point in which we really couldn't scale and grow it much past the point in which it was at. And really, honestly, lessons were kind of learned there, of course, as you heard from Jack here as well. So we had kind of seen that business through to its maturation. But then you can see where Jack took it from there. Jack took those skills that he learned. He really took that education that he had learned, building up the drop shipping company and building up Stir Six Coffee Roasting Company. And then he decided to launch his own entrepreneurial endeavor. So I went from kind of being the main startup guy to now really just the guy who sits on Jack's board, kind of consults with him, but now he's ultimately the one, leading the charge. So, Jack, I'd really like you to answer, kind of this question that's kind of lingering in my mind. I know there's a lot of pressure, okay, on high school kids and college kids to have it all figured out by the time they become a legal adult at 18. How do you think about, that kind of uncertainty that a lot of kids that are teenagers feel, where you decided to really collect your experience, through entrepreneurship, versus going and pursuing a 4-year college degree?
I guess my advice would be just forget about it. You're never gonna have it figured out. And I've kind of learned from you that, like, you could be 45 and still not have it figured out. As long as you're doing something, as long as you're still moving, as long as you've got motion, you know, then you're on the right track as long as you're moving in some direction. Um yeah, so I guess I'll just continue the story. So I rotated Dyer Brothers I renamed it Superior Ground Management, and then I redid the logo and everything like that. And I did that just to, I thought it might appeal better to more more refined taste customers. It's kind of more of like a premium name. It's just a brand image thing. And then I ran that through the summer. We did pretty good. And then I ended up shutting it down this fall because my intention was to go to school. And originally the plan throughout high school was to go to school for business. And I ended up, the only reason I was going to do that was to gain more skills to put towards, um, to put towards the business. But I ended up just kind of falling out of love with it, because it was just a pretty high stress environment running a lawn care company. And then I wasn't ever able to step back and, chill out. I had to be there every week, 5 days a week. And if I wasn't there, I was still worrying about it and thinking about it. Um, so I ended up switching my plan for college. I ended up taking a semester at Pine Tech for gunsmithing. I took that program, and while I was there, I kind of had that realization again, like, hey, I'm pretty good at business, and just because the one didn't work out doesn't mean that there's not another way to go at it, which is why I started LandClear again, this winter. Um, I say it's the same company, just under three different names. It's all just, kind of me at the core, and then everyone else, supporting, propping it up. As a matter of fact, I have a quote as soon as we're done for a tree job. Um, but yeah, like, I didn't have it figured out. I had people asking me, how is this? Or, how's it going at the U? I had a few family members ask, because that's where I was going to go for business school. And I was like, oh, let me catch you up here, because I've rotated about 5 different times from that direction. Um, but I just kept moving as long as you're not standing still, as long as, you don't have idle hands. If you got something to do, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and especially when you can find something to do and monetize, that effort.
I'm Zach Haptonstall, CEO and co-founder of Rise 48 Equity. Our goal is to help you protect and grow your wealth by investing in large multifamily apartment buildings. We do all the work as far as sourcing these large apartment buildings from the brokers, doing all of the on-site management with our vertically integrated property management company, doing all the renovations with our vertically integrated construction company. We completely rebrand the exteriors. We will renovate the interiors to our full platinum level scope, which increases the value of the asset to get that profit margin for the investor. If you'd like to learn about how you can partner with us on these exciting opportunities, you can go to our website and set up a call with our team.
You attended college, you kind of scratched that entrepreneurial itch. After high school, you were largely in college, even in high school, doing the going the PSEO route. So I know that this kind of question or statement is not theoretical for you, but I want to ask, in what situations do you actually think that college does make sense for some, whereas it doesn't always make sense for others?
Oh, I've kind of got the same opinions that you hear people like, like Charlie Kirk had, or like, a lot of other, right wing influencers. They usually say the same thing. If you're not going to be a doctor or a lawyer, there's no point. I'd kind of expand on that. A lot of engineers get a lot out of it just because there's a lot of things that you need to, learn and study under a professional, and that seems to be a pretty good way to do it. Um, for me, I don't think it made sense. In business, you'll learn a whole lot more just doing it than you ever do sitting in a lecture. And I've never learned very well in a classroom setting. I didn't do too good um, in public school through sixth grade. That's how long I went, and then the homeschool setting ended up being very good for me through 10th grade. And then PSEO was all just online classes on my computer. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of it, a lot of what got me through that was Chat GPT. So, thanks to Sam Altman, I graduated. But, you know, um, I never learned too well with anything that didn't interest me. So, if you have something that you're interested in and there's good, course offerings at a different school and you do pretty well in a classroom setting, I'd say then it's probably a better fit for you. But, if you got some rambunctious teenager that just can't sit still, maybe he'll be better off learning, taking an apprenticeship from a construction site. Um, I just think you kind of got to tailor your education towards you. Not everything that's built into this current system that we have in America is going to work for every single person. I don't think it's supposed to. Um, and the thing with the public school system is it was originally invented to teach people how to work in a factory, how to do the same thing over and over and be repetitive. There's studies done on this. Um, and we don't have very many factory jobs in this country anymore, and I don't think people are waking up in the morning going, "Oh, man, I can't wait to go work a 12-hour shift in a factory in Detroit, Michigan." No offense to anyone that does that, but um, I think that your education should be tailored towards what you want to do in life, and I think what you want to do in life should be something that you're interested in.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's unfortunate that I think a lot of, individuals realize that, before it's too late. I would say another benefit of attending, a four-year, university or college is, I think for a lot of individual, young adults, it takes a little bit more time, for that frontal cortex to kind of harden, and it gives folks a little bit more time, before they're really ready to kind of launch, their careers, into the professional world. But isn't it great, Jack, that we live in a free, America where we have, these types of options, available to us, where if we are entrepreneurial minded and we have a little bit of tenacity that goes along with it, we can really create, something from nothing, which is, really largely a biblical principle as well. So I'd like to kind of dial into that a little bit more, regarding, your faith, and how did your faith really, influence your willingness to take this kind of non-traditional, path where the safer option to many is just to follow the script and go to, college after high school.
I believe that God gives us all individual gifts, and I think that it's the respectful option to use them, to the best of your abilities. You're supposed to do everything as if you're doing it for the Lord. Um, and then, on top of that, of course, getting very successful in business, in finance and whatever you do, you have a higher level of influence. And I feel like, using the higher level of influence can be very beneficial towards, benefiting the kingdom. Um, I'm sure you've seen that too, podcast host, you reach a lot of people every time you go on the camera. And I think, you're able to reach more people. And I think if you can reach more people with the intention of, maybe we get a few more converts, a few more familiar faces in heaven, I think that's always a good thing.
Yeah, amen to that. What about like daily habits or weekly habits? Do you think matter more than a diploma when it comes to a person's kind of long-term success journey?
Sure. I think it's really just as long as you're moving. If you got something to do, and then if you have downtime, figure out something to do. It's never good just to sit and be idle. Don't get caught up in the doom scrolling, that's an addiction on the same level as opiates. Um I don't think it's good to ever just sit and consume. um as a business person, if you're looking to grow in business, the worst thing you can do is stop working on the business. Obviously take rest time, you got to have rest time. So, get a few hours of sleep. You're always very big on sleep. Anytime I get a little bit moody or like, JD, it's because you're not sleeping. um but yeah, as long as you're moving, find something to do to be productive. But um yeah, just do that. Don't do something that's like, you're just wasting time. Like, I know I got caught up in just like changing the color on my spreadsheets just because it felt like I was being more productive, even though I wasn't. Um, a lot of times the most productive thing you can do is just going out and finding more clients, because I feel like that's typically the problem a lot of young entrepreneurs run into. I know myself included. Is the biggest problem a business can run into is if money's not flowing in. So go out and find it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you highlight something really, important there as well as, productivity can be productivity in name only, whereas there's a big difference between that and actually being effective with your productivity. And that is ultimately driving, that progress forward, as opposed to just kind of putting the wheels in motion, so to speak.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, I'd like you to kind of maybe comment about, looking ahead. You're 19 now. Jack's birthday was just yesterday, so he's now 19 years old. Looking ahead, and by the way, just for the record, like I've mentioned this on the podcast before, I didn't really put any numbers to kind of Jack's success in the past, but his previous business enterprise, Superior Outdoor Services, did incredibly well. He was a multiple six-figure, gross income earner with that company, and had a tremendous amount of success at it before he made the decision, along with his parents' decisions as well, to pursue, a college path before now deciding to go back and kind of reinvent himself in a new, business enterprise. So he had a tremendous amount of success, already in the space as a small business entrepreneur. But Jack, I'd like you to maybe kind of comment about, the next 5 to 10 years from now. So kind of looking ahead, what do you think this kind of early exposure that you had, as a teenager when it comes to risk and work ethic and accountability? What are some of those early things that are going to kind of shape you as a man and a leader into the future?
Sure. I think with the risk side, it's always good to start while you're still living at your parents' house. Um, I could start a business and it could be gone tomorrow, and I still have a roof over my head and a pillow under my head. But um, yeah, I've always been a risk taker. I think anyone who knows me kind of understands that. I've never really been afraid of a challenge. Um, and yeah, I guess the biggest risk that you're taking in business is really just on the money side. Um, and obviously your time and opportunity cost, but that's, money. Um, I Yeah, so the reason why I decided to start this company again, one of the big determining factors was we had a day um after one of my lectures. There was a bunch of people who set up booths all around the hallway, and they were, kind of showing what the job field looks like and my career path. Um and I was looking at all the numbers where it's like, you start as an apprentice and after 10 years you're making this number. And I'm like, I made double that in a summer doing landscaping with my brother. It just felt kind of like, why would I want to be a wage slave for my whole life when I could go out and I could just do something and then that thing is also mine. I've always kind of liked having an ownership over stuff that I'm doing. Um, And yeah, I feel like that's just more worth it to me than it would be to play it safe. I've never liked playing it safe.
Yeah,
Um,
total makes total sense, Jack. And yeah, we definitely don't want people to be, playing it safe, especially, when they're teenagers. Obviously, making the right decisions, of course, is paramount to that. But beyond, that point, I like to use the word kind of wrestle, right? Sometimes people think that teenagers, if they don't have it all figured out by the time they're 18, 19, 20, that they kind of are waffling, right? Whereas I like to look at it more like you're wrestling with what you want to do ultimately for the rest of your life. And in some cases, that's a desk job for some people. But for other people, that's individuals that want to go out there in the community, and make a living for themselves, right? Like I said before, scratch that entrepreneurial itch, get out there in the workforce and build something, for themselves so that ultimately day in and day out, they're building a business to basically build their own dreams instead of the dreams of somebody else, if that makes sense.
yeah, for sure. With business, you're going to be able to grow it at the rate that you want it to. So if you're all in on the business, you're more likely to succeed. Whereas if you're working a day job, you can put in twice the amount of effort and, maybe you get a raise. You're helping to grow somebody else's business, somebody else's dream, and I'd just rather grow my own.
Yeah, you can give yourself a raise anytime you want, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to clarify as we kind of wrap up the episode here, JD. We're not telling our listening audience that this is about being anti-college. Okay, this episode is really about being pro ownership, pro responsibility, and pro truth. And there's a lot of paths that people can take, to really build what we call "quote unquote" a good life. And the right one is the one that builds character, builds competence, and builds, conviction. I'll call that the three C's: character, competence, and conviction. So with that said, Jack, any additional parting words that you'd like to kind of leave, our listening audience with today?
Find something that inspires you to do what you want to do. If you're going to be an engineer, go find an engineer that's very successful. Go follow Palmer Luckey. Go follow some engineer that's made it, that's got to the point that you want to be at. I remember one of the big determining factors of me starting a lawn care business was I watched Grant Cardone's episode of Undercover Billionaire, where he goes undercover and he gets $1 million company set up in 90 days. And I was like, wow, this is possible for somebody that's, got no local recognition. He had, I think, like $1,000 or something like that. Um, and just find something to kind of keep you on that track. Make the goal obtainable. Kind of be able to visualize it. um that's always just been helpful. I feel like sports players do this too. They've got, if you want to be a professional hockey player, maybe you're watching highlights of Patrick Kane on the weekends, or whoever's big, Alex Ovechkin. Do the same thing in what you want to do.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And, it's interesting because, all the education is all out there, right? You can find it for virtually free. You don't have to pay for it. It's all there, out there for free. What's not always there is accountability, right? And so I think that's oftentimes why a lot of folks will resort back to kind of the traditions of the way that we've always done things, is because there's built-in accountability there, okay? The same thing is true with professional sports athletes. Like, I can go find a dumbbell somewhere for free. I can go lift a piece of furniture, do some push-ups or sit-ups, right? But at the end of the day, oftentimes people need that accountability factor built into it in order to be able to be successful. And that's really true in the entrepreneur space, right? Is oftentimes you don't have somebody that is holding you accountable. You have to find a way to hold yourself accountable, and you have to be the one that makes the decision every single morning to continue to grind and put in those reps day in and day out, because you are only answering to yourself. You're not answering to somebody, else in a workplace setting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. You got to be able to be self-motivated or have people around you that are going to be able to push you forward. Having you in the house every day has been very beneficial for me, because you'll walk down here and if I'm sitting doing nothing, you'll be like, go do something.
Yeah, go find a way to make it rain.
Yeah. I think a lot of very successful founders will say that having a very motivated co-founders also kind of kept them on the right track. And again, business isn't for everyone. I had a classmate during my time at college tell me that I would be a better business owner than a machine operator, because I was very good. I was one of like only 5 people that passed our machining class, in a class of I think like 28. And I was good at it, but I was always just kind of bored of it. I was like, I feel like I'm not growing anything by doing this. I feel like I need to be growing something.
You need to be stretched more. Well, JD, thank you so much for spending time with me today on the On the Rise podcast. Really appreciate your value and your inputs. I know we've been trying to get this recording to come together for the last several months. So thanks for making time for us today, and for providing our listening audience with a tremendous amount of value.
Yeah, sounds good.
And listening audience, thank you again for jumping into yet another episode of the On the Rise podcast. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the On the Rise podcast. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decisions, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the On the Rise podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.